It's on. I've done so much talking today, I thought it might make it a bit easier for me and you if I did use the microphone. Because after 4 one-hour talks, the old voice begins to wane a bit. What a great evening. What an impressive event, if you will. And you know, it's not the size of the audience that makes it impressive. There are probably fewer than 50. But I want you to note the diversity of the gathering. The youthfulness of the young people that are with us and the vintage of age. So we truly have a blend of our society today in America. Just a very special evening, and I've enjoyed it so much. I'm looking forward to an opportunity tomorrow to be a part of their interview process. I'm excited about that. I was talking with Haley. I guess you need a title of a talk, and I don't always have titles. Maybe this talk would be titled Through the Eyes and Memory of Bob Gaylor, in keeping with sort of the theme of the evening. Go with me, if you will, back to December 7th, 1941, small town of Rossville, Indiana, 627 people. That's what the sign said as you entered the village. It's a Sunday morning in Rossville, and the Gaylor family, mom and dad and 8 kids, have just come back from church. And I had a nickel in my pocket that was burning a hole. And I knew that uptown at Shep's restaurant, he would take a Milky Way candy bar and put it in the freezer of the refrigerator, and for a nickel, oh, it was the most delicious thing you ever could have eaten, was a frozen Snicker. So with my nickel, I thought I would treat myself to a frozen Snicker candy bar. So I walked uptown to Shep's restaurant, and I walked in, and they were huddled around a radio, 6 or 7 people, and the radio was on. And I stood there for a moment, and I said, I want to buy it. And they went, shh. Could I get it? Shh. I'd like to buy it. Shh. I don't think I ever got my Snickers. They gave me 3. They were huddled around the radio. And I went home Snickerless. And when I got home, my dad was huddled around the radio. I don't know if you were around 1941, but in those days, radios were all static. You'd hear, and then maybe you'd pick up a word or two, and then, because the stations were a long ways away. And my dad was huddled around the radio, and I could see by the look on his face that he was very intent. I was 11 years old, an 11-year-old lad, and once Dad got the info, we all, what is going on? And he said, the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. And I had no idea where Pearl Harbor was. I didn't know. All I knew was that my dad appeared very concerned about what was going on. So this 11-year-old boy became very wide-eyed, if you will. The next day, you know what happened? All the young men of the community went off to do what? To join, to sign up. Because President Roosevelt came on the radio and said, this is a day that will end in, or be in infamy, or something like that. And so all I knew, it was something very serious. And you know what? My mom, for the first time ever, she went to work outside of the home. And everything was happening so quickly. And World War II became a reality. Wow. And all the boys. And you know, I was a Boy Scout, and we used to collect newspapers and take them uptown, and a truck would come and take them. And we'd collect tinfoil off of candy wrappers, anything. Everybody was doing their bit for the cause. And I look back now at the significance of World War II. And it had tremendous influence on the country that we live in today. For one thing, it required us to immediately industrialize. We went from a farming type society, if you will, to an industrialized nation. We had to build airplanes and tanks and guns. if you will, to fight the war. It changed Mom's role dramatically. It took Mom out of the home where she was influentially raising the kids and thrust her into a working environment to replace the men who had gone off to fight. It was a time of sacrifice. Gasoline was rationed. My dad had an A stamp on his windshield that entitled him to 4 gallons of gas a week. A B stamp gave you 8 gallons, and a C stamp gave you 12. To get a C stamp, you had to prove you needed your car to make a living. If you used it only for transportation, you couldn't get a C stamp. And you couldn't get coffee or sugar. You couldn't buy Jell-O and butter. And the first oleomargarine was a white 1 pound, looked like lard. And it had a little packet of coloring. And you tear it out and pour the coloring and take a fork and make the oleo yellow because it looked like lard. I remember all that. That's from the mind of a young 11, 12, 13-year-old kid. But you know what? Nobody complained. You know why? Everybody was doing their cause. Everybody was focused on bringing the boys back home again, safe and sound. We need to get out of this. We need to win the war. And so there was tremendous sacrifice. And the society became very mobile. Young men who had never been 100 miles from home suddenly found themselves in places maybe they couldn't even pronounce, like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Tawara, and Salerno Beach. And you know, once you've seen Paris, Peoria, Illinois doesn't look quite as exciting. And so World War II was extremely influential in totally and dramatically changing the way that we lived our lives and did things. And then, of course, the war ended. It went on for 4 years. And at the height of the war, we had 12 million men and women serving actively on duty. And what a tremendous event. And then the war ended, and the boys came marching home. And some of them were limping, and most of them had a ribbon or two. And they had a lot of stories to tell about where they'd been and what they'd seen. And when the war ended, I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school. And the first thing the boys coming home did was grab all the girls. Yeah, all the girls. Oh, he's wearing a uniform. And yeah, I couldn't find that news going to the prom. I think I took a 7th grader because the veterans came home and grabbed all the ladies. And the war ended. And the factories that made tanks and airplanes began making cars and refrigerators. And the theme changed. And by 1947, I graduated from high school. And I didn't realize at the time, but I had been tremendously influenced by the boys coming home from the war. Subconsciously, I was standing back going, wow. For one thing, they got all the girls, and they got stories to tell, and they got ribbons, and they're wearing their uniform, and they look so sharp. I don't think I realized that I was being programmed. I was being influenced by what was happening. And I graduated from high school in 1948. I said, I think I want to join the military. But the universal thought throughout the world, this is important. There will never, ever, ever, ever be another war. That was a belief. There's never going to be another war. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan and vaporized 500,000 people. Nobody's going to be so stupid to start a war under those conditions. We're now looking at peace, prosperity. Life is going to be good. And so this young man, 18 years old, joined the Air Force for 3 years, not to fight a war, but to get away from home and grow up, learn a skill, satisfy my patriotic itch, then maybe go back to Indiana and live happily ever after. But you remember what happened, you've read about it. In the summer of 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. And everybody said, what? And the first question was, where's Korea? And we had to go to a map and a globe. Oh, there it is. Well, let them have it. That doesn't look to be worth fighting over. The reason nobody ever heard of Korea is it wasn't called Korea. It was called Chosen. Until 1945, the country was known as Chosen because it was under Japanese control, and the Koreans didn't like the Japanese. As soon as World War II ended, they changed it to Korea because they didn't want that name they had been given. So nobody ever heard, where's Korea? What's a Korea? And we all looked at it. And you know what? We weren't ready to fight it because there was never ever going to be another war. We didn't have the wherewithal to go fight it. If it wasn't for the Garden Reserve, we'd have been in trouble. A lot of the Garden Reserve that served in World War II were come on back and go over there and engage in this war because active force, we're not ready to do it, either training-wise or equipment-wise. And so we thought Korea was like a gnat. Have you ever had a gnat fly around it and you get away? So I think we thought that Korea was like a gnat. It'll go away. My gosh, North Korea, they don't have it. It'll go away. But it escalated. And by 1951, we said this gnat isn't going away. This is becoming a full-scale matter. But they didn't call it a war because war was never declared. We called it a police action. And so what is going on over there? Well, we've got a police action. And so the North Koreans pushed us all the way down to Busan, almost into the Sea of Japan, the Yellow Sea, and then we got some people in there, and we pushed them back. And then they pushed us back. And the Korean people had two flags, depending on who was pushing. You know, because one day, North Koreans, and here come the South Koreans. And then the active force geared up, and Douglas MacArthur, the great World War II veteran, went in there and eventually invaded Incheon with a rather large force, and we pushed the bad guys out. But you know what happened? China got involved, and Russia got involved. We went, whoa, this is a different thing. This is becoming a big event. My gosh, now that China's involved, they came in out of Manchuria and across the Yalu River. And the next thing, my gosh, we are engaged. We lost 45,000 lives in an undeclared peace act, a police action. And so you try to tell a Korean veteran, nah, it was a gnat. There wasn't, and they'll tell you no. It was a big event. Unfortunately, it's a forgotten war. Like we never wanted to admit it happened. Like, well, we'd rather not talk about it. How many years did it take to put up a Korean monument? It took 35, 40 years before we'd even indicate a memorial to those who had served. How unfortunate, what a shame that we sent people over there. Many were injured and killed, and we didn't give them the recognition they deserved. Okay, in 1953, we met with them in Panmunjom, and we signed an armistice, an agreement. Let's at least stop shooting at each other. And still today, there are people sitting in Panmunjom trying to arrange a treaty. But at least at the 38th parallel of Korea, there's no longer any fighting to speak of going on. There have been a couple of incidents, but no fighting like we had in the Korean War. Okay, now Russia had gotten involved, so we said, uh-oh, we didn't realize Russia was going to get involved, and they became sort of our perceived enemy, and we entered into what became known as the Cold War. I don't know who came up with that term, but it became known as the Cold War. And so now we're up to 1954, and a war that wasn't supposed to happen now we're in a Cold War. What's a Cold War? Well, we got to be prepared. We built bunkers in cities where we could all go down underground in case the mean Russians attacked. And we practiced base defense, another program designed to discourage Russia from invading. And we dug missile silos all over America and pointed the missiles toward Moscow. And we put bombers in alert areas all over SAC bases with training to scramble the airplanes within minutes and fly up over the North Pole and bomb the bad guys. How long did the Cold War go on? We spent millions of dollars, billions of dollars. We had distant early warning radar sites all across Canada, thinking at any minute the Russians were coming. And then we had famous people like Kurt LeMay, Strategic Air Command, and various others. And then Khrushchev came to America. Have you ever seen the film? He took his shoe off at the United Nations and he pounded on the table. And he said, "We will bury you." Well, this guy appears to be crazy and serious. And then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. You remember that? Where Russian ships were sent toward Cuba with missiles on them, or U-2 aircraft. Took photos of that. And President Kennedy called Khrushchev's hand Kennedy and said, "You better back off," and they did. Some of you remember this. I'm coming down through history, through the memory in the eye, because all that time I was serving. See, when the Korean War broke out, my 3-year enlistment was up and they wouldn't let me out. Haven't you read the paper, Gaylor? There's a war going on. Yeah, you can't get out. You got to stay in. So I re-enlisted and ended up staying in 31 years. And so I'm coming down through the years. Now in 1962, they send my family and I to Japan. Kenny would have been about 2.5 or 3, and off we go to Japan. And I'm a cop in Japan. And while I'm in Japan, we have some classified alert teams. And they're called the purple team and the yellow team and the blue team. And what do? They might be dispatched at any time. Where? We can't tell you. It's classified. And so sure enough, they were alerted, and I lost about 12 men to a team that went somewhere. This was 1963. You know where they went? To a place called Vietnam. Nobody had ever heard of Vietnam. What are they doing down there? Can't talk about it. It's classified. So now we've got purple alert teams going into a godforsaken place called Vietnam. And the American people had never heard of it. And then about 1965, some of our troops going into Vietnam were killed. And we stood up and said, "Wait, you can't do that. You can't kill our people, or we'll come in there and mop you up." And by 1966, we were back in a war. And it wasn't supposed to happen. And we never declared war. We called it to something else. And it became politicized, and it became ugly, and it became unpopular. And on college campuses, we had all kinds of confusion, and riots and demonstrations in Kent State in Ohio, and Jane Fonda and her ilk. And we just had a muck for how many years? 65, 6, 7, 8, 9, 70. And originally, if I recall, the war in Vietnam, to the military person, it wasn't popular, but it was, let's go in there and do what we have to do and get out of there. Let's go in there and clean up. After about 5, 6 years, even the military were saying, "What's going on? We've lost 50,000 lives. Are we going to fight this thing, or are we going to get out of there? Why are we messing around like this?" And there were those who said, "Go in there and mop up," and others saying, "You shouldn't even be there, get out of there." And so it was very divisive. If you were around, you remember, you probably took a stand. Should we be there or shouldn't we? Should we be doing this or shouldn't we? My gosh, wars weren't supposed to happen. Now we've had Korea, and we have the Cold War, we had the missile crisis. What is going on? Now we've got this place called Vietnam. And in 1973, we signed a truce. Let's stop shooting at each other. Let's back off a bit. And we called it a truce. Well, there we were. And meanwhile, the military is going like a roller coaster. We're building up, shutting down, building up, shutting down, building airplanes, stop building airplanes. Now, we're just on a roller coaster ride. Those